yesterday? Excuse me. Okay. You remember that lady who came, who knocked the door, Prabhupada's door in the middle of the night? That girl. And Prabhupada got locked. So I think that's where we read it. This was why Babaji's of Vrindavan stayed in their little cottages chanting the holy name to avoid being bothered by ungodly people. The Babajis, of course, never even dreamed of these bizarre intrusions from the psychedelic San Francisco night. At Mukunda's door, Prabhupada began pounding and calling loudly, Mukunda, Mukunda! Mukunda awoke and opened the door, astonished to see his spiritual master standing barefoot in the hallway, a wild-eyed young girl standing a few feet behind. Yet Prabhupada remained grave and aloof. This girl came to my door, he began. He explained briefly what had happened and what should now be done. He did not appear angry or harassed by the girl, and he indicated that Mukunda should deal kindly with her. That's very nice, eh? Prabhupada, how in spite of all this thing, he dealt very nicely, kindly with her. Mukunda remembered when Prabhupada had been driven out of his New York Bowery loft by his roommate David Allen, who had gone mad on LSD. Then also Prabhupada remained cool-headed, though caught by dangerous and awkward circumstances. Mukunda went downstairs and awoke Hayagriva, who had a key to Prabhupada's apartment. Srila Prabhupada then returned to his room and to his dictation of teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Mukunda saw the girl down to the street and admonished her not to bother an elderly gentleman like the Swami at such an hour. Staring at Mukunda, she said, "You are not ready," and walked away. At 7 o'clock, when Prabhupada came down to the temple for the morning class, the girl was sitting in the audience in a calmer state of mind. She apologized. Later in the day, Prabhupada repeated the story in good humor, recounting how he had several times asked the girl to speak. He opened his eyes wide, imitating her expression, and said, "Look, Mahaula," and laughed. Prabhupada is imitating. We shall go for a walk, and at 6:30, Srila Prabhupada said one morning, "You can drive me to the park." Several devotees accompanied him to Golden State Park's Stowe Lake. They knew the park well and led Srila Prabhupada on a scenic walk around the lake, over a bridge, through forest enclosed paths, and across a small rivulet, hoping to please him with nature's beauty. As he walked, striding quickly, he would point to a tree or stop to examine the flowers. "What is this tree?" he would ask. "What is this flower?" All those disciples were usually at a loss to answer. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu passed through the forest of Vrindavan, he said, all the plants, trees, and creepers were delighted to see him and rejoiced in his presence. The plant life there is like that in the spiritual sky, fully conscious. And these trees, Swamiji, how conscious they are. "Oh, the spirit soul is there," Prabhupada said, "but the consciousness has been arrested temporarily. Perception is more limited." Whatever Prabhupada saw, he saw through the eyes of scripture. And his comment, I'm seeing how much, and his comments on the most ordinary things were full of transcendental instructions. As he walked, he reflected around. Those who want to see God must first have the qualification to see God. They must be purified, just like the cloud is now covering the sun. They say, "Oh, The sun is not out, but the sun is there. Only our eyes are covered. Here, the incident is that as that girl, accidentally Prabhupada locked his room, Mukunda, he woke up Mukunda, and Mukunda surprised to see, and Hayagriva had the key. Prabhupada went back and opened it, but he really acted very calm, without an agitation. Interestingly, the next day class, that girl is in the class, and she apologizes that, and Prabhupada makes imitates the situation. Whole, what is that? He said that hola, mahaola. Look, mahaola, because she said that word mahaola. I don't know what is mahaola. You know what is mahaola? AJ?
I got nothing. No idea.
Must be hippie language or something. Anyway, now next day, Prabhupada started morning walk. Now looks like, so the devotees took him to the Golden Gate Pass, Stowe Lake. They knew this is a beautiful place. Now Prabhupada is examining all these trees and flowers and everything, and everybody is saying, is the trees and conscious? So Prabhupada answers, they are. Spirit soul is there, but the conscious has been arrested temporarily. Perception is more limited. So he reflected the clouds. He gave an example. Now while walking, morning walk, he will have a lot of realizations he can share to devotees. I think devotees recorded so much of stuff. While walking also, he was training his disciples by giving all these examples.
Like tour guides, and the boys led Prabhupada to the more picturesque areas. They came upon swans gliding on the lake. Srimad Bhagavatam Prabhupada said, compares devotee to swans, and literature about Lord Krishna to beautiful clear lakes. The non-devotees, he said, were like crows, attracted by the rubbish of mundane topic. Walking over a gravel path, he stopped and drew their attention. Look at the pebbles. As many pebbles there are that many universes. And in each universe, there are innumerable living entities. The devotees delighted in bringing Swamiji to a rhododendron glen. Its big bushes completely covered with white and pink flowers, and they felt privileged to see Krishna through Swamiji's eyes. The next morning, when Prabhupada again wanted to go to the park, more devotees accompanied him. They had heard from the others how Swamiji had displayed a different mood while walking. Again, the boys were ready to lead him along new trails around the lake. But without announcing a change in plans, he walked up and down the macadam road beside the lake. Prabhupada and his followers came upon a flock of sleeping ducks. Awakened by the sound of people walking on the path, the ducks began quacking, moving their wings and walking away. When a few devotees hurried ahead to soothe the ducks from Prabhupada's path, the ducks began making sounds of grouching and crumbling. Move, you ducks, one devotee said. You are disturbing Swamiji. Prabhupada said quietly, as we are thinking they are disturbing us, they were thinking we are disturbing them. Prabhupada stopped beneath a large tree and pointed to some bird dropping on the ground. What does this mean? He asked, turning to a new boy who stood beside him. Prabhupada's face was serious. The boy blushed. I don't know what it means. Prabhupada remained thoughtful, waiting for an explanation. The devotees gathered around him, looking intently down at the bird droppings, the way people read the future in teachings. He felt he should say something. It's the excreta, the defecations of our birds. Prabhupada smiled and turned toward the others for an answer. They were silent. It means said Prabhupada, that these birds, he pronounced the word birds, have lived in the same tree for more than 2 weeks. He laughed. Even the birds are attached to their apartments. As they passed the board court and the old man playing checkers, Prabhupada stopped and turned to the boys. Just see, he said, all people in this country do not know what to do. So they play like children, wasting their last days, which should be meant for developing Krishna consciousness. Their children are grown and gone away, so this is a natural time for spiritual cultivation. But no, they got some cat or dog, and instead of serving God, they serve dog. It is most unfortunate, but they will not listen. Their ways are set. Therefore, we are speaking to the youth who are searching. When Prabhupada and the boys passed a sloping green lawn just off KJ Drive, the boys pointed out that this was the famous hippie hill. In the early morning, the gently sloping hill and the big quiet meadow surrounded by eucalyptus and oaks were silent and still. But in few hours, hundreds of hippies would gather here to lounge on the grass, meet friends, and get high. Prabhupada advised the boys to come here and hold kirtans.
So this is, I think, new experiences for devotees again, to preaching opportunity for again. Prabhupada did we. Okay, so so the devotees show in the many places. He said that he showed the cross, difference between the crows and the swans. Swans are like devotees, and crows are there attracted to rubbish and mundane topics. So he wanted the devotees to be swans. Then he shows the pebbles is that as many pebbles there as that many universes are there, unlimited universes. So next day, and they also brought him to rhododendron glen. Rhododendron glen. It's big bushes completely covered with white and pink flowers. So they're happy that they feel privileged to see Krishna through Swami's eyes. But next morning, after devotees heard, many other devotees also joined him. And as Prabhupada is walking, the scenery was given, and devotees are chasing with the ducks. So Prabhupada was last 3 point the bird dropping. So what does this mean? So they couldn't answer properly. Prabhupada says, smiled and turned out to others for answer. It means that these birds, he pronounced, these birds have lived in the same tree for more than 2 weeks. Even the birds are attached to their apartments. So similarly, he gave the example that old people also so much of attached, even after their children leave the house, they're still attached to that. They don't engage in devotional service. They don't understand the purpose of life, spiritual cultivation. Therefore, we are speaking to the youth who are searching. Now, when Prabhupada and the boys passed a sloping green lawn just off Kejar Drive, the boys pointed out that this was the famous hippie hill. So that's where hippie hill, all the hippies will be gathered. The Prabhupada said, why don't you all come and hold the kirtan here? So with this, we finish our chapter 22nd, named, it was a big chapter, right? Swami invites the hippies. It was a long chapter, I think, but it is because a lot of things we learned. So we are beginning the chapter 23, entitled The Price Affair. AJ?
Swamiji's disciples in New York were surprised to find that they could still carry on in his absence. At first, rising early, going to the storefront, and holding the morning kirtan in class had been difficult. Without Swamiji, everything had seemed empty. But he had taught them what to do, and gradually they realized that they should simply follow what he had shown them, or even imitate, as a child imitates his parents. And it worked. At first, they had been too shy to speak or lead the kirtan, so they played tapes of Swamiji's kirtans in classes. But when the evening came and guests attended the temple, the devotees felt compelled to give live classes. Raya Rama, Brahmananda, Sattvarupa, and Rupanuga took turns giving brief talks and even answering challenging questions from the same Lower East Side audiences that Srila Prabhupada had lion tamed for 6 months. Things were shaky and lacking without him, and yet, in a sense, he was still present. And the devotees found that everything, the chanting, the cooking, the taking of prasadam, the preaching, could still go on. On January 19th, just 3 days after his arrival in San Francisco, Prabhupada had written back to his New York disciples. They were his spiritual children and were very dear to him. Although far from his homeland, India, he hadn't thought of writing to anyone there. Since he was a sannyasi, he had no interest in writing to any family members or relatives. And as for writing to his godbrothers, there was not much importance in that, since they had repeatedly shown their reluctance to help. But being in a new city among new faces and having met with an initial fanfare of success, Prabhupada had wanted to share the news with those most eager to hear. He had also wanted to reassure his disciples, whom, after only a few months of training, he was expecting to conduct the Krishna consciousness movement in New York. So while Prabhupada was in San Francisco, the devotees at the New York temple were still trying to keep everything going on. And at first they were a little intimidated and too fearful to lead kirtan or give lectures themselves, so they just play tapes of old Prabhupada lectures and kirtans. But at night they felt, as they had more people there, they felt that they had to give live classes. So, they found that they could just, after a while, they found that things could go on, even without Prabhupada. They were still able to hold the daily program and the chanting and the cooking and everything. And then, after a couple days after Prabhupada got to San Francisco, he wrote back to the guys in New York, and it talks about how, he didn't have any desire, because he was a sannyasi, to write to his family. He didn't, write to his godbrothers in India, because they had let him down, and they weren't, they were reluctant to help him. And so he wrote the people that were most eager to hear from him, which was the New York devotees.
This is a nice word here. And it worked for the New York devotees. That's very nice. First time they're able to do by themselves. So at the beginnings, they had played the tapes for Swami's Kirtan's classes, but eventually they spoke, right? Compelled to give classes. Raya Rama, Brahmanand, Sattvarupa, and Rupanuga, they all took their turns. I'm glad New York is on its own wheels. Okay. Prabhupada writes here, right? I missed a little bit from training he was expecting to earn. Prabhupada writes to his disciples. Okay, who is there? Yeah, Prasanti. Prasanti?
Yes. My dear Brahmananda, Hayagriva, Kirtanananda, Satswarupa, Gargamuni, Achitananda, Jadurani. Please accept my greetings and blessings of Guru, Gauranga, Giridhari, Gandharvika. You have already got the news of our safe arrival and good reception by the devotees here. Mr. Ellen Ginsberg and about 50 or 60 others received us on the airport. And when I arrived in my apartment, there were some press reporters also who took note of my mission. 2-3 papers like the Examiner and Chronicles, etc., have already published the report. One of the reports is sent herewith. please find. I wish that 1,000 copies of this report may be offset printed at once and 100 copies of the same may be sent here as soon as possible. I understand that you are feeling my absence. Krishna will give you strength. Physical presence is immaterial. Presence of transcendental sound received from the spiritual master should be the guideline of life that will make our spiritual life successful. If you feel very strongly about my absence, you may place my pictures on my sitting places, and this will be the source of inspiration for you. I am very much anxious to hear about the final decision of the House. I wish to open the House by the 1st of March 1967, and arrangement may be done dexterously in this connection. I have not I have not as yet received the tapes of dictaphone, and I have sent you tapes yesterday. Please offer my blessings to Srimal Neil. Sriman Rai Rama is cooking well and distributing prasadam to the devotees, numbering sometimes 70. It is very encouraging. I think this center will be very nice branch without delay. Everything is prospective. Hope you are well and awaiting your early reply. The letter had helped, especially the second paragraph. Brahmananda had posted it in the storefront. Now, Swamiji had clearly enunciated that they were still with him and he was still in New York with him. It was something special service to the spiritual master in separation, and even the devotees in San Francisco, who were with Swamiji every day, could not yet know its special taste. While the devotees in New York performed their daily duties, they often quoted from the letter and thought about it. Krishna will give you strength. Physical presence is immaterial. Presence of the transcendental sound received from the spiritual master should be the guidance of life. This will make our spiritual life successful.
Ayyo.
Prabhupada addresses to 7 devotees, and writes a letter with his blessings of Guru Gauranga and Giridhari, etc. And he shares the good news about the good reception and about the devotees over there, and how they have been received. And he's also able to give a note of his mission to the reporters, to the 2 papers like Examiner and Chronicle. And he also sent that report and wanted 1,000 copies of that report printed. And he assures the devotees, saying that even though he is absent over there, Krishna will give them strength, and his physical presence is immaterial, and the presence of transcendental sound received from the spiritual master will help, is going to help them and provide them guidance in their spiritual life. And they may place some pictures of him in wherever places he sits, so that they can derive some inspiration. And he also talks about the final decision to have a temple over there, and he wants to open it before March 1967. And he also sent some tapes, and he also offered blessings to Sriman Neil. And he also talks about the prasadam they are distributing over there, and he is happy about the devotees who are picking up Krishna consciousness, and also he asked them to reply. So this letter is posted in the storefront, and everybody is getting inspiration from there. They are reading it even in the talks. Yes, that's all.
The magic has begun now. How Prabhupada empowered devotees. This is magic. They didn't know what's happening. Prabhupada looks like he clearly knows that he's not coming. He guided them, but from there he gave the service, all the services he gave. He said, I wish to open the house by 1st of March 1967. and so many things. Anyway, so he guided them. So it helped devotees about what to do. Okay, Vijayanand Prabhu.
Although Prabhupada had written that they could place his photograph on his seat, no one had a photograph. They had to ask the devotees in San Francisco for one. A boy took some poor color snapshots and sent them to New York, and the devotees placed one at Prabhupada's sitting place in his apartment. It helped. For Prabhupada also, the letter to his disciples in New York marked a milestone. This was the basis on which he hoped to conduct a world movement. He could travel from place to place and yet be simultaneously present in many places by his instructions. Brahmananda, as president of the New York Temple, frequently phoned San Francisco. The chanting is the focal point. He told Hayagriva, we can always sit and chant. We are beginning to understand what Swamiji meant, and when he said that worship in separation is more relishable. And Srila Prabhupada wrote to his New York disciples regularly at least once a week. Brahmananda got most of the business instructions, arranged to purchase a new building in New York, see Mr. Kalman and get copies of the Kirtana record, get a copy of the movie a filmmaker had made of the devotees, investigate the possibility of publishing Bhagavad Gita. If I'm assisted by one expert typewriter, Prabhupada wrote Brahmananda, we can publish every 3 months a book. And the more we have books, the more we become respectable. Satsvarupa got a letter from Prabhupada asking him to type the dictated tapes of the new book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Although Prabhupada's typist Neil had gone to San Francisco after a day, he had disappeared. I think you have 5 tapes with you because I have got only 3 with me, Prabhupada wrote. See what the tapes do not miss. See that the tapes do not miss. Satsvarupa had written inquiring how he would be able to understand transcendental knowledge. You are a sincere devotee of the Lord, Prabhupada replied, and certainly he will bless you with auspicious advancement in the matter of spiritual understanding. So earlier Prabhupada instructed his New York devotees to place his photo in case if they are if they are not happy with his absence. But the thing is, no one in New York, they did not have any photograph, so they cannot put his photo on the seat. So they asked for the devotees in San Francisco for one photo. A boy took a poor color snapshot and sent them to New York, and the devotees placed in the proper sitting place, his apartment, and it really helped the devotees. And for Prabhupada also, the letter which he sent to the disciples in New York, it marked a big milestone for him, because that was the basis that he hoped that he would conduct a world movement, and he can travel from place to place, and simultaneously he can present in many places by his instructions. So for the New York Temple, Brahmananda was the president, and he frequently phoned San Francisco, and also he mentioned to Hayagriva, the chanting is the focal point, and they were able to understand that what Swamiji meant, and they felt that worship in separation is more relishable. And also Prabhupada wrote a letter to the New York disciples regularly, at least once a week, and where he gave the instructions to the New York disciples. Like Brahmananda got all the business instructions on what are all the next steps to be done, arranging to purchase the new building in New York, and to see Mr. Kalman, get copies of Kirtana record, as well as get a copy of the filmmaker who had made a film of the devotees, and also to check for the possibility for the publishing Bhagavad Gita. Also, he mentioned if he was assisted by an expert typewriter, he can publish every 3 months a book, and the more we have the books, and he felt like we become more respectable. And Satsvarupa got a letter from Prabhupada to asking him the dictated tapes of the new book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So because Prabhupada's typist Neil had gone to San Francisco and he had disappeared actually. And he mentioned like, I think he was like to Satsvarupa that you have 5 copies because I got only 3 with me, and see that you do not miss the tape. And Satsvarupa also had inquired him like how he would be able to understand the transcendental knowledge. And for him, Prabhupada replied, like you are a sincere devotee of the Lord, and he will bless you with auspicious advancement in the spiritual understanding.
Very nice. How Prabhupada gave everyone's responsibility, big responsibility. It's not an ordinary thing, right? He made that team, how very expertly he put that new building and Kirtan recording, filmmaking, publishing the Bhagavad Gita, dictating, teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Everything was a lot of engagement in spiritual. Cycle.
Hare Krishna. Rai Rama got a letter encouraging him to continue publishing the magazine. Back to Godhead will always remain the backbone of the society. Your ambition should always be how to improve the quality. Achyutananda, one of the youngest devotees, only 18, was now working alone in the kitchen. In a letter, Srila Prabhupada wrote to 5 devotees, signing his name 5 times. He told Achyutananda, since Kirtananda is absent, certainly you are feeling some strain. But the more you serve Krishna, the more you become stronger. I hope you are being properly assisted by your god brothers. Prabhupada advised Garg Muni, also 18, to cooperate with his older god brothers. Asking whether Garg Muni had gone to see his mother, Prabhupada said he hoped she was all right. Since Garg Muni was the temple treasurer, Srila Prabhupada advised him, checks should be drawn with full deliberation. Prabhupada wrote Jadurani, I always remember you as the nicest girl because you so devotedly engaged in the service of Krishna. She had informed him that she had been cheated by a boyfriend, and Srila Prabhupada replied, better you accept Krishna as your husband, and he will never be unfaithful. Devote yourself therefore 24 hours in the service of Krishna and see how you will feel happy in all respects. Rupanaga had written Prabhupada that the temperature in New York had dropped below 0 and that there had been a 2-day blizzard. Srila Prabhupada wrote, certainly this situation would have been a little troublesome for me because I am an old man. I think Krishna wanted to protect me by shifting me here at San Francisco. Here the climate is certainly like India and I'm feeling comfortable, but uncomfortable also because at New York I felt at home on account of so many beloved students like you. As you are feeling my absence, so I am feeling for you. But we are all happy on account of Krishna consciousness, either here or there. May Krishna join us always in his transcendental service. So here Prabhupada writes to the different devotees in New York. So Rai Rama got a letter asking him to basically focus on back to Godhead, to continue publishing the magazine, and always look to improve the quality. For Achyutananda, who was helping in the kitchen, he was helping Kirtananda. Now he is responsible for the kitchen. He is alone, and he said, even though you are feeling some strain, you will become stronger the more you serve Krishna. And he is also hoping that he is getting assisted by his god brothers. Garg Muni, who is also one of the youngest devotees, he checked with him how his mother was, and because he was the temple treasurer, he advised him to be careful about withdrawing money and using them, like being thoughtful of it. And with Jadurani, he appreciated her because she is so devotedly engaged in Krishna service. And even when she replied back saying that she had been cheated, he asked her to basically accept Krishna as her husband, and she will never be unhappy. And if you devote herself to Krishna 24 hours a day, like she'll be very happy. And Rupanaga wrote to Prabhupada saying that there was a blizzard and the temperature had dropped below 0. And Prabhupada replies back saying that because he's old, it would have been troublesome, and Krishna wanted to protect him by moving him to San Francisco, where the climate is like in India. And he also says that he feels New York as home because there are lot many students like him. But even though he asks them to be happy with Krishna consciousness wherever we are.
How nicely, wonderful he wrote everybody and managed all these big important tasks. And Nipa, you can read.
Hare Krishna. The neophyte disciples in the New York felt assurance from their spiritual master's word and by their own experience. Service and separation was transcendental fact. They were improving and chanting on their beats, and the New York Center was going on. So long our Kirtana is all right, Prabhupada wrote, there's no difficulty at all. But there was one difficulty. Attempts to purchase a new building which had gone on smoothly while Prabhupada had been present had become a great problem as soon as he had left. Shortly after Srila Prabhupada's departure for San Francisco, Brahmananda had given Mr. Price $1,000 and Mr. Price had promised to help the devotees get their building. When Prabhupada heard this, he became perturbed. In the opinion of devotees and the trustees here, $1,000 has been risked without any understanding. I know that you are doing your best, but still there has been an error of judgment. I'm not at all displeased with you, but they say that Mr. Price will never be able to secure financial help from any other source. He's simply taking time under different pretexts, changing constantly. Therefore, you should not pay even a farthing more than what you have paid. If he wants any more money, you should flatly refuse. Srila Prabhupada remembered Mr. Price and their first meeting at which the blonde-haired, elegantly dressed businessman, his face tanned even in winter, had addressed him as Your Excellency. That address alone had made Prabhupada distrust him. There was a Bengali saying, too much devotion denotes a thief. Prabhupada knew that businessmen were prone to cheat and that an American businessman would be particularly difficult to deal with. Prabhupada's American disciples were innocent children in worldly affairs. He was ready to instruct them step by step, but now, without consulting him, they had become involved in an unbusinesslike transaction, risking $1,000 of the society's money without any written agreement. Srila Prabhupada had visited the building on Stuyvesant Street and he wanted it. It was a historical, well-kept, aristocratic building suitable to his New York headquarters. It was worth the 100,000 price if they could afford it. But it was difficult for Prabhupada to know from San Francisco what was going on between Brahmananda and the businessman. So, here it says the neophyte disciples in the New York were assured by spiritual masters' words and their experience. Uh, Service and separation was like a transcendental fact. They were improving and chanting on their beats, and the New York Center was going on. Uh, Prabhupada wrote, as long as the uh, kirtana is all right, there's no difficulty at all. But there came one difficulty in attempts to purchase a new building, which had been going smoothly while Prabhupada was present. But after his departure for San Francisco, Brahmananda had given Mr. Price $1,000. Mr. Price had promised he would help the devotees for the building. When Prabhupada heard this, he was perturbed. In the opinions of the devotees, like the trustees here, and the trustees, $100,000 had been risked without any understanding or knowledge. And it was like unsure whether Mr. Price would be able to secure the financial help from any other source. So he's simply taking taking time under different pretexts, changing context constantly. So Srila Prabhupada remembered Mr. Price and their first meeting and description how he was blonde haired and had addressed him as Your Excellency. This itself had made Prabhupada distrust him. There was also he remembered of a Bengali saving, it says too much of devotion also denotes kind of a thief, and to deal with an American businessman would be difficult for him. The disciples, American disciples, according to Prabhupada, were innocent in worldly affairs. He was ready to instruct, to take step by step without consulting him. But they had become involved in an unbusinesslike transaction, risking thousands of dollars of the society's money without any return agreement. And Srila Prabhupada had once visited, oh, did I read that? Yes. Had visited the building on Stuyvesant Street, and he wanted it. It was historical and suitable for his New York headquarters. It was worth $100,000 price if they could afford, but it was difficult for Prabhupada from San Francisco to understand what was going on between Brahmanand and the businessman.
Isn't it unbelievable? Can you believe all these children, who are 18-year-old? It's like Prabhupada ran the international society with the teens and 15, 16, 18-year-old, like our Vishnu, Gaurang, and all these small kids. We don't think it, but it was raised by this kind. So we can do so much actually. We should always contemplate what we can do. But I can believe that this young 20-year, 18, 20-year kids ran all this thing. Okay, maybe I can read this. Right? And the difficulty increased as letters and phone calls from Brahmananda introduced other persons involved. Aside from Mr. Price, there was Mr. Tyler, the owner, and Mr. Tyler's lawyer, who seemed independent of Mr. Tyler. And finally, there was ISKCON's lawyer, who also had a mind of his own. All the Srila Prabhupada's disciples usually surrendered to his direction. They seemed bent on listening to the businessman's promises, even though their spiritual master had cautioned them not to. It's just beginning. The first step itself, there's all these issues has arisen. Prabhupada became disturbed. His preaching in San Francisco was being threatened by fears that the businessman would cheat his society of what he had begun in New York. With no responsible advisors to turn to, Srila Prabhupada sometimes discussed the problem with Mukunda and the other devotees in his room. They all agreed that the transaction seemed highly irregular. Brahmananda was probably being led on by false promises. Brahmananda, however, saw Mr. Price was a rare person, a successful man who wanted to help the devotees. Although no other respectable businessman had ever shown interest, Mr. Price listened and sympathized, and he would greet the devotees with Hare Krishna. Brahmananda was well aware of the humble economic and social position of the devotees. They were almost all ex-hippies and they were poor. But here was Mr. Price, a wealthy man with diamond cuff links, who was always glad to see him, shake his hand, pat his back, and speak appreciatively of the religion of India and the moral behavior of the small band of devotees. Mr. Price had received a group of devotees as guests in his apartment and said nice things about each one of them. He had said that Hayagriva was an excellent writer and that Back to God was the best magazine on the market, and that its mimeographed appearance made it look even better than the slicks. He said he would give the devotees a movie projector, and he came close to saying that if he could liquidate some of his money, he would give them the building. So now here the Prabhupada is, is not trusting very easily in all these complications. It's so much of hard. Prabhupada knows the situation, how he has come. It is very hard and collections. It's not so easy. Krishna's money. Now he's unsure what it is going. Brahmananda is handling, and somehow devotees trust because they know how to deal. So they trust Mr. Price. Okay, he's been nice. He spoke good about everybody. He's nice. He likes. He greets us as Hare Krishna. Pats him, and so they like his dealings, and that looks like they're trusting him very much. So this is the whole situation. We don't know what's going to happen. And at the same time, he had said that and he came close to saying that if he could liquidate some of his money, he would give them the building. So that's what Mr. Price was telling. But I don't know why he has to take $1,000. I hope things goes well. AJ?
Brahmananda, who saw Mr. Price a few times a week, would come away intoxicated with high hopes. The Krishna consciousness movement could rise to success through this wealthy man's patronage. After leaving Mr. Price's office, Brahmananda would rejoin the devotees in the evening and tell them all that had happened. On nights when there were no public kirtans, the devotees would hold meetings. Swamiji had named them
Ishtagostis.
Yeah, Ishtagostis, to discuss the instructions of the spiritual master. And the Ishtagostis became dominated by talks of Mr. Price in the building. One night, Brahmananda explained why he had given Mr. Price $1,000. Mr. Price had asked for something to work with. It was like earnest money, and it was also for a trip Mr. Price had to take to Pittsburgh to see whether he could release some of his wealth to use in Krishna's service. One of the boys asked whether there would be any receipt or written agreement. Swamiji had taught them to use receipts, or at least amongst themselves. Gargamuni and Satsvarupa, as treasurer and secretary, signed each voucher, and Gargamuni kept the vouchers on file. These included requests for items like 50 cents for a hat and $3 for sneakers. Brahmananda said he had mentioned a written statement to Mr. Price, but hadn't pressed the matter. Anyway, it wasn't necessary or even desirable, since they were not simply conducting business with Mr. Price, but cultivating a relationship. Mr. Price was a well-wisher, a friend, who was helping them as charity. He was going to do big things and use his influence to get the building. This $1,000 was just a gesture to show their interest and to show Mr. Price's friends the devotees weren't joking. They had some money. So it sounds like a scam, right? But yeah, so Brahmananda was kind of punch drunk on this. He was meeting Mr. Price a few times a week, and he was coming back, and he was just on a high from thinking that they were going to get this building, and Mr. Price was going to release the funds and be able to help them out. And even the meetings that they would hold amongst the devotees, it even became the topic of those meetings solely. And Brahmananda was trying to explain to the other devotees why he's giving this guy money, right? If this guy has money, why are you giving him money? And he said Mr. Price had asked, and it's essentially as a way to show that they're serious, like they're serious in making this investment, and they have money to work with. And then it gets into talking about how Prabhupada had taught them to take receipts and keep document like financial transactions, even for little things like 50 cents for a hat or $3 for let's say $3 for sneakers. But for whatever reason, they didn't think, Brahmananda didn't think he needed to do that with Mr. Price, because he was a well-wisher and he was helping them. So yeah, like I said, it sounds pretty scammy, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but the way it's shaping up right now, it sounds like this guy's fleecing them for some money, but we'll see.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Okay. Prasanthi, please read. Prasanthi, yeah.
In fact, the devotees had $10,000, $5,000 in small donations, and $5,000 donations from wealthy hippie. In addition to donations, the temple had a regular monthly income of $800, Brahmananda's $400 paycheck from his job as a substitute teacher for the New York City public school system, and $400 paycheck Satsvarupa earned as a caseworker for the welfare department. But the devotees were in no position to buy any building, and they knew it. All the more reason, Brahmananda explained at Ishtagoshti why they had to depend on Mr. Price. After all, he reasoned, Swamiji himself had inspired them to look for a $100,000 building. Swamiji knew they couldn't pay for such a building. except in such extraordinary way, and Mr. Price, Brahmananda figured, must be the way. Swami wanted the building. No sooner had he reached San Francisco than he had written back. I am very anxious to hear about the final decision of the house. I wish to open the house by 1st of March 1967, and arrangement may be done dexterously in this connection. The assembled devotees listened to Brahmananda's explanations, sympathized, and added their own understanding of how Krishna and Swamiji were working. There were a few contrary remarks and opinions, but basically everyone agreed. Brahmananda's dealings with Mr. Price were all right. When Kirtanananda and Raya Rama returned to New York from San Francisco, they consulted with Brahmananda. Then Brahmananda went to Mr. Price, who promised that if somehow they could get the building, he would return at least $750. The balance of the money represented travel in the devotee's interest, but they would get the building, Mr. Price assured him. Then Mr. Price told Brahmananda the latest. He had found a wealthy financier, Mr. Hall, who had almost agreed to pay the full 100,000 for the building. Mr. Price was working on Mr. Hall, who happened to be his close friend. Prospects seemed good, but the devotees would also have to do their part. Mr. Price explained. By putting up $5,000, Mr. Price would then arrange everything else. It looks like a trap.
Yeah, they're
Um,
experts.
so the devotees held Ishta Goshtis. Yeah, it explains
Yeah.
about how devotees got the money. They have $10,000 in total, 5,000 from small donations and 5,000 from a wealthy hippie donation. And
Hmm.
they're also getting two paychecks, one from Brahmananda and one from Satsvarupa, $400 each. And that is how they are running the storefront. And in the Ishtagostis, Brahmananda explained that Swamiji and Krishna are looking for them. And Swamiji himself looked for $100,000 building, which they won't be able to pay. So he was hoping that Mr. Price would chip in and they would get the building. And as Swamiji was very anxious to open the building by March of 1967, they need some kind of arrangement with Mr. Price. And they all seem they have different opinions, but they all seem to agree with what Brahmananda said. And Kirtanananda and Raya Rama returned to New York from San Francisco and consulted with Brahmananda. He told them that uh, in the $1,000 deposit that he gave to Mr. Price, he would return $750 back and would keep the rest for the expenses. And later, they found that Mr. Price found a wealthy financier, Mr. Hall, who is ready to give $100,000 for the building, but they have to put up $5,000 to work with that arrangement.
Sounds like a challenge now itself. Okay. Nipa, you can read. Nipa, can you hear?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Mr. Price set up a meeting with an architect on Park Avenue, and soon Brahmananda and Satswarupa were sitting with Mr. Price and his architect friend reviewing sketches. To give the building that authentic Indian temple look, the architect proposed a facade with arcs and if they liked domes. It was wonderful. Of course, they didn't dare ask him how much it would cost, but Mr. Price even hinted that the work might be done free. After Mr. Price served himself and his architect friend some liquor and offered some to the boys, although he knew they wouldn't accept it, the two men held up tinkling glasses, smiled, and politely toasted themselves. and the boys saying Hare Krishna. While going down on the elevator, Mr. Price spoke eloquently of the devotees' faith in God. He said that the others might argue about the existence of God, but the most convincing thing was the devotees' personal experience. Your personal testimony, Mr. Price assured them, it's the best argument. It is a very powerful thing. The boys nodded. Later, among themselves, they laughed about the liquor, but still they figured these men wanted to help. When Srila Prabhupada heard about the latest developments, he did not share his disciples' optimism. On February 3rd, he wrote Garga Muni, I had a talk with your brother Brahmananda yesterday on a dial. I'm glad that Mr. Price has promised to return the amount of $750 in case no sale contract is made. But in case you should not pay any farthing amount than what you have already paid either to the lawyer or to Mr. Price unless there is actual sale contract made. It appears to me very gloomy about the transaction because there was no basic understanding before the payment of $1,000 either to the lawyer or to the real estate. This is not business like. Unless there's a basic understanding where is the way of transaction. If there is no basic understanding, why so much waste of time and energy? I cannot understand. If there was basic understanding, why is it changed so quickly? And therefore perturbed in the mind when there was no basic understanding, what was the need for appointing lawyer? Anyway, it is my advice that you should consult me before issuing any further money. But I hope you will make the transaction successful without further delay. So here it says about Mr. Price had had a meeting with the architect on the Park Avenue, and soon Brahmananda and Satya Swarupa were sitting with the Mr. Price and the architect friend doing this sketches and giving the building an Indian authentic temple look like. And the architect proposed a package with arches and domes. It was wonderful, and they didn't share how much it would cost, but Mr. Price hinted that the work would be done for free. After Mr. Price served himself and architect of liquor, he offered to the boys, but the two men they knew that they won't accept. So the two men, the architect and Mr. Price, held the glasses and said and toasted and boys saying Hare Krishna. While going on the elevator, Mr. Price was speaking eloquently to the devotees in the faith of God. He said others might not argue about their existence, but the most convincing part is the devotees, their own experience, and that is the best argument one can have, and it is powerful thing. The boys nodded, and later they laughed about the liquor, but still they figured these men wanted to help. When Srila Prabhupada heard about these developments, he did not share his disciples' optimism, but he wrote to Gargamuni and he said in the writings, he said that your brother Brahmananda yesterday was on the dial and Mr. Price promised to return the $750 if there's no sale contract made. But he also mentioned in any case you should not pay any more amount of what you have paid to the lawyer or to Mr. Price unless there's a sale contract done. It appears to him that very gloomy about the transaction because there was no basic understanding before the payment of $1,000 either to the lawyer or the real estate. Did not sound like a business like transaction. So there was no basic understanding in all these transactions. And it sounded like more of a waste of time and energy. And so he said that before any transaction, it would be his advice that he should be consulted by to issue any more money and look like the transaction and also made that the transaction successful without any further delay.
Vijayanand Prabhu.
Srila Prabhupada had also instructed Gargamuni to protect the $10,000 in the bank and never withdraw any sum that would leave a balance of less than 6,000. Prabhupada had left one account for which the devotees were the signers, but he had an account for which he controlled the funds. He now asked the devotees to put $6,000 from their account into his. He wrote Brahmananda, this $6,000 will be transferred forthwith by me as soon as there is a sale contract for purchase of the house. On February 10, Prabhupada wrote to Kirtananda, regarding the house, I was correct in my remarks that there was no definite understanding. In such negotiations, everything is done in black and white. Nothing is being done in black and white, but everything is being done with faith on Mr. Price. Let this understanding be completed within the 1st of March 1967 and close the chapter. I think this is my last word in this connection. You're all grown up boys, and you use your discretion, and you can now complete the transaction without prolonging it indefinitely. If, however, we are not able to purchase the house, it doesn't mean closing our activity at 26 Second Avenue. So there is no question of packing up and coming to SF. Then February 15, Prabhupada wrote Satsvarupa. So far, I can see from the correspondence of Brahmananda, it is not possible for us to get the house for so many reasons. The main reason is that we have no money to pay cash, and nobody is going to invest cash in that house because it is neither complete nor has any income. It is simply utopian to think of possessing the house, and Mr. Price is simply giving us false hope. You are all innocent boys without any experience of the world. The cunning world can befool you at any time. So please be careful of the world in Krishna consciousness. When Krishna will desire, the house will come to us automatically. So Prabhupada wrote a letter to Garga Muni, like mentioning that to protect the $10,000 in the bank and never withdraw it to have a balance less than 6,000. And Prabhupada also left one account for the devotees for the signers, and he had another account where which he controlled the funds. Now he asked the devotees to put $6,000 from their account into his, and so that only if there is any sale contract, he will transfer back that $6,000 again to that account. And on February 10th, Prabhupada wrote to Kirtananda saying that he was correct in his remarks that like there is no definite understanding, and like in the negotiations, everything should be done in black and white. But with the recent things which was happening, it was like everything being done with faith and Mr. Price. And he was mentioning that we should complete this by March 1st of 1967, and that and close this transaction. And he felt that this will be my last word on the connection. And mentioned that they were all grown up boys, and they should use their discretion and complete the transaction without like delaying it indefinitely. And also in worst case scenario, like if they are not able to purchase a house, it doesn't mean that they should close the activity at 26 Second Avenue and everyone should come to San Francisco. And on February 15, Prabhupada wrote a letter to Swarupa. He was mentioning that Brahmananda, with the correspondence with Brahmananda, it looks like it is not possible to get the house for many reasons. And the main reason was like they do not have a money to pay cash, and nobody's going to invest in cash for that house because no one has because house is not complete, or it does not have any income. He also mentioned that Mr. Price is just giving a false hope. And he mentioned like we are all innocent boys without any experience in the world, and like in the world people can cheat, and so please request them to be careful in the world of Krishna consciousness. And when Krishna will desire, the house will come to them automatically.
Srila Prabhupada's doubts were confirmed when Mr. Price wrote to him asking for money. If Mr. Price had so much money, Prabhupada reasoned, why was Mr. Price asking him for money?
Yeah.
On February 17th, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Mr. Price to impress upon him that there would have to be a sale contract before ISKCON could actually purchase the building. If there is sale contract, my students here and in New York will be able to raise the fund very seriously. In the absence of any sale contract, everything appears to be in the air, and Mr. Tyler or his lawyer can change his word as he has already done. Srila Prabhupada's message was clear. Brahmananda, however, complained of pure communications. Things were always changing, and Brahmananda wasn't always able to get Swamiji's confirmation on the latest changes. Swamiji would write his instructions in a letter, and although the devotees had to obey whatever he said, the circumstances would often have changed by the time they received the letter. Swamiji would also sometimes change his opinion when he heard new information. Sometimes Brahmananda would call San Francisco and Swamiji wouldn't be available. Brahmananda didn't feel right about sending messages to the devotees in San Francisco because he knew that the devotees there were skeptical about the whole transaction. If New York got the building, San Francisco would have to donate $1,000. And the devotees in San Francisco, of course, had their own plans for how to spend money for Krishna. Mr. Price suggested to the devotees in New York that maybe the Swami didn't understand American business dealings. With all respect, His Excellency couldn't be expected to know all the intricacies of finance in a foreign country. And His Excellency's request for a purchase contract was, as Mr. Price put it, something that went out with hoop skirts. Brahmananda and Satsvarupa did not know how to reply. The remarks seemed like blasphemy, but Brahmananda and Satsvarupa were already entangled in the promises Mr. Price had given and went on meeting with him. They would meet with Mr. Price and then ride back to the 2nd Avenue on the subway chanting Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada wrote almost daily to the various devotees in New York. On February 18th, he wrote a letter to Brahmananda with the word confidential typed at the top of the page. Now, if you think he is able to secure the money for us, there is not something hopeful by this time, then you can continue the negotiation as he is doing. But do not, for Krishna's sake, advance a farthing more on any plea by him. He may be trying his best, but he is not capable to do this. That is my honest opinion. So here, basically, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Mr. Price that if he's because he's asking for money, like why is he asking for money? If and the if there is
He
no,
said he will give free. He said he can give free. He has money, and then nonsense is asking money. That's the big thing. Yeah.
And if they want money, he should have a sale contract. Because if there is no sale and if there's a sale contract, the devotees will in New York and San Francisco will do a fundraiser to get the money seriously. And then if there's no sale contract, anything can change, and they already changed their words a couple of times. So and here it says Brahmananda and Satsvarup. He wrote a letter to Brahmananda, which was basically Brahmananda would say that there are some challenges because of communications, because by the time Swamiji's response comes back, things would have changed, and it wouldn't be in the same context anymore. And Brahmananda would call San Francisco to speak to Swamiji. He wouldn't be available, and he didn't feel comfortable sending the message to the devotees in San Francisco, because there I think the devotees would have additional plans, different plans for how to spend the money. And then Mr. Price would say Brahmananda and Swatswarup that like Swamiji doesn't understand how American business dealings happen, so he doesn't know how a contract is done, and Brahmananda and Swatswarup would not know how to reply, and they would just come back. And at once Prabhupada wrote a letter to Brahmananda with the confidential saying that don't spend any additional money on Mr. Price. And he's talking a lot, but he's not able to do this. And then that's it. I think that's
We will finish this today. We're almost done. So Prabhupada, you want to read? Come quickly.
So now, if you think he's able to secure money for us, if you think that there's something hopeful by this time, then you can continue the negotiation as he is doing. But do not, for Krishna's sake, advance furthermore on any plea by him. He may be trying his best, but he's not capable to do this. That is my honest opinion. While trying to avoid further losses in New York, Prabhupada continues active preaching in San Francisco. Mukunda and others were lining up lots of engagements, and the reception was often enthusiastic. In the same confidential letter to Brahmananda, in which Prabhupada put forward his strategies for negotiating with Mr. Price and the company, he also wrote glowingly of grand successful meetings at various Bay Area colleges. The meetings were similar, he said, to the wonderful kirtans in Tompkins Square Park. This was the way to spread Krishna consciousness, not by becoming entangled with treacherous real estate agents. I'm closing here with a copy of the letter received from Himalayan Academy. See how they're appreciating our method of peace movement. So in this way, we have to forward our cause. No businessman will come forward to help us on the utopian schemes as contemplated by Mr. Price. We have to for ourselves. So the summary is to obtain and hire purchase sale contract from Mr. Tyler and popularize our movement by outdoor engagements, as many as possible. Srila Prabhupada had done what he could. The boys were foolish, even to the point of not listening to him, but they had raised the money themselves. If despite his instructions they lost it, what further help could he give? So he simply went on with the San Francisco preaching and advised the boys in New York also to become convinced of achieving success through kirtan. So Prabhupada just continued saying that if they're gonna be able to just to like not to lose more money and to try the best, try to recover the money, but if not, just don't do it. And Prabhupada continued his preaching in San Francisco, and in his confidential letter to Brahmananda, he put forward strategies for negotiating with Mr. Price, and he also described his kirtans and the par and their spreading of Krishna consciousness in San Francisco. And he also enclosed a copy of a letter received from the Himalayan Academy and how they're appreciating their peace movement. And so like this, he says they have to continue moving onwards. And Prabhupada said that the boys were foolish, and even though he had given specific instructions, they still lost the money. So what more instructions could he give? So he simply went on continuing with this preaching and advised the boys in New York to achieve success through kirtan.
Yeah, yes, for examples also he was giving the spiritual competition. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm glad we finished one new chapter also today. We'll continue with text chapter 20 tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada lilamrita ki jai. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hey, who is there? Huh? You've been listening.